Hello everybody and a warm welcome to our Sports Ground Safety Authority webinar. My name is Charlotte Richardson and I'm going to be your host for the next hour as we hear from our range of guests on this subject before opening up today's webinar to you to submit your questions. As slides unfold and as we hear more about this development to our game, if you have any questions that you would like me to pose to our guests, then please use the chat function that is on the right hand of your screen. Simply submit your name, the club you're from, and the question you would like me to pose. We're going to dive straight in and I'm going to introduce my guests. I'm delighted to say that we are joined by Andy Robinson, who's going to be leading the presentation this evening. Andy is an inspector from the Sports Ground Safety Authority. Also pleased to say we are joined by Mark Pover, who is the facility lead of the England Football Club programme. We also have our league representatives in attendance as well. It's a warm welcome to Paul, Kelly and Jason. It's great to have all of you with us. And Mark, before we hand over to Andy, I just think it would be really good to set the scene for people, why we've hosted this webinar, why we've all come together, and why the information we're going to hear in the next hour is so significant for clubs moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. The purpose and the reason behind this was the clubs have gone through some consultation in recent months, recent weeks. And the clubs had highlighted that looking at the ground capacity, ground management, ground operations was a key function that they felt they needed some more help, some more advice, some more information on. And that's formed the basis of why we're putting on this webinar tonight. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions and probably some follow-ups to this, but this was just a start of trying to help and support the clubs. And give back from our side, from the FA club programme, give back to the clubs exactly what they were looking for and exactly what they'd asked for. So that's the rationale behind it.
Starting point, and this webinar is going to be recorded as well because we're conscious that whilst we have club representatives with us tonight, there will be people you want to forward this on to, colleagues and volunteers from across the football club as well, that will want to know about the subject at hand. So without further ado, Andy, I am going to pass over to you to bring us up to speed and to talk about the changes that are coming forwards.
Yeah, good evening, everybody, and thanks, Charlotte. My name's Andy Robinson. As you heard, I work for the Sports Ground Safety Authority. I'm one of 11 inspectors that work in England and Wales, and between us we look after the 92 EFL and Premier League clubs and license them for safety purposes. We also look after Wembley Stadium. I've been there with the group for about 5 years in total. I also was a police officer for 30 years, worked in the Home Office on football. And for my sins, I did 2 Wembley seasons as a stadium safety officer there. So I hope I can bring a bit of knowledge to you, but the only thing I will say is that I'm still learning. So please do bear with me, but I hope this is of interest to you. And just a quick one there, the regulatory role, Sports Ground Safety Authority. So we have a regulatory role in law. Following the Hillsborough disaster, we were implemented and asked to oversee safety at the very strategic level. So those are the clubs that we look after, those 92 in the top leagues, and we have a fairly regular engagement with those. We also set standards where we can for safety at sports grounds. We write the Green Guide, we write the safety management at sports grounds, and any other advice and materials coming out, and we work at the European level and also with FIFA. So we try and bring all of their good practice and learnings back to the UK, England and Wales in particular. And then, of course, we do advisory, and that's self-explanatory, and that's why we're here tonight. At the moment, we've got a big bit of work going on with the National League at Step 1. And some of that work is very much around informing, educating and supporting. And it's pretty much through that work, I think, that this seminar came up, because as well as Step 1 and all the leagues above, there's a thirst for knowledge further down, and in particular with guys and girls like you in the Steps 3s, 4, and even beyond there. So we're going to rattle through some of the very basic safety guidance. We have a website, the SGSA. It's just in the process this week, I think, of being changed over to a new one. But we have a website, and on that website, and no doubt Mark will push this out as a link, we have what we call a safety essentials guide. It's not the Green Guide, which is many pages long and a thick volume of technical and practical advice. It's the safety guide itself is very much aimed for clubs like yourself at the smaller venues. It explains the good practice. It helps develop the important documents and records that you're needing to do. We provide templates and advice around how you can go about doing those. It signposts a great deal of guidance that exists elsewhere on our website or with partners like those in Protect UK within the police terrorism units. And it's supposed to be a quick and easy reference because we realise that your challenges are very much different to the ones that might be faced at some of the Premier League grounds and some of the super stadiums that we see in and around the country. I think that bottom one there is quite important. A colleague of mine who's just retired actually was quite keen to put that on because when we read guides and advice and guidance, it can sound very dictated. It can sound like it comes out and there is no option. But your level and the numbers of crowds that you're dealing with and the challenges you face financially in terms of scale, we very much would support you doing stuff in a proportionate way. So I think some of the advice we're putting out in this Safety Essentials Guide should assist you with that. And we'll talk about that shortly. Just some examples, really. If you go into the guide itself, there's plenty of hyperlinks on there. There's some worked examples from the Green Guide. So how you work out safe capacities at grounds, how you decide what your P factors are and S factors, all that sort of stuff is in there. There's a video actually, which is pretty good by Rick Riding. He's a technical expert who's just retired, but he's done a tremendous amount of work for many years in the lower leagues. And he talks through simply, it's about 25 minutes long, how to go about your capacity calculations. There's stuff in there about steward fact sheets, what you should have in terms of plans, and we'll talk about that tonight. Some on accessibility, and then the others that you can see there for yourself. So, this Safety Essentials Guide is really a portal into a load of other bits of different advice that you can get hold of and use. So one of the team I know sent round some questionnaires asking what the most common interest was out there in terms of how we could assist as the SGSA at your level. And I think one of the top responses was, how do we do capacity calculations that are Green Guide compliant? Why do they need to be Green Guide compliant? Because that's what the FA and your leagues will use as the guide, the standard for capacity calculations. And if they are convinced that the stuff that you've done is compliant with the Green Guide, then it's more readily accepted across the industry. What are capacity calculations for? Well, I think everybody would agree. Without understanding how big your stadium can be in terms of safety, and the numbers of spectators that can safely attend, then there's no going forwards really. So it's the foundation really for a safe stadium. We've seen that at many events across the world. In fact, tragedies where too many people are in stadiums or in parts of stadiums, and very quickly things can turn very nasty. So the idea is to get your ground measured, assessed, and understood, so that you know what they can take in total and what areas of the ground can take what numbers, and then you can adapt it from there on in. So we're going to talk you through that. It's a step-by-step process. It's quite simple in terms of the steps, but there is a bit of technicality in how you actually do the measurements, and we'll talk about that shortly. Anything that you guys do with safety, I can't advise you strongly enough, having been in the witness box many times when things have gone not so well. But it's your records and your reviews that are really important. So anything you do, if you can get into the habit very early on of putting it all in one place so that you can refer back to it, the date, who was with you and what happened, that would be fantastic. And that's a first bit of really golden good practice. You're very happy to share, and I would encourage you to share capacity calculations if you do deal with local authorities with them. Some of them are very supportive. If you do have safety advisory groups, I know some do and some don't, but your partners would be interested in understanding that. And of course, these numbers, these final numbers that you come up with, are really important for ground grading, as I explained, but also short notice cup matches. So I had a phone call probably about 5-6 weeks ago, early rounds of the FA Cup, where one club called in and said, could we pop down? They've got a match in 10 days, and could we do the capacity calculations because they need to sell the tickets and they're expecting a sellout. The sad thing is that's really too late to do that. You really need to have this stuff in your manuals and understand it from the very start, because when you do get the big match and it comes out of thin air following an FA Cup or a trophy draw or a Vase draw, that's when you need your whole safety team and the commercial team and the ticketing office, and especially the owner, to understand how big your ground actually is and what is the safe number of people to put into it, because that's the first questions that the police and indeed sometimes the FA will ask you. So really important to have this stuff for ground grading, but really important to have it for your short notice cup matches and as the foundation throughout the season. So the capacity calculations start off with understanding how many people you can get into the viewing areas, and that's what this is all about. The grounds are huge, but you can't just simply say, well, we've got 1,000 square meters, we can put that many people in. There's only certain places where people can view from, and they tend to be either seated stands, standing terraces, or level standing areas, which I'll touch on in a moment. Now, the number of seats in a stand sounds quite good. So if you've got a stand with a roof on or without a roof on, it will have a certain number of seats. It matters not to us in particular and anybody else whether they're allocated to directors or the press or to your supporters. Ticket people are interested in that, but from a capacity point of view, and when you're looking at the limits on ground grading, it's the number of seats that are usable. Importantly, though, there will be some there that are quite restricted in their views. It might be that there's pillars in the way. It might be that during ground development last year, you put fences and walls up in places that they weren't originally intended. So there might be seats where you can't actually see the play. And it's important that they actually do see 100% of the field of play. So that's touchline to touchline, goal line to goal line. They should be able to see all those areas. All the seats should be of a decent sight line. We call that the C value. Let's ignore that. What it means, the C value, is that if you're sitting in front or behind somebody, that those behind or in front of you, you can actually see the pitch. If you have a very low rake, if you go to some of the cricket grounds, you'll see they have chairs around the ground. You can't really see over the heads. And if you can't see the pitch and you can't see over the heads of the people in front, then you end up standing up. And once you stand up, you guys who are trying to control this begin to lose control in terms of movement, but also numbers of people entering the area. So very important that the seats have a good C value, which is, as I say, the amount of headspace that you've got over the person in front to see the people. And if it's too low, then those seats should not be used. Unacceptable viewing distances. There are, you are dealing with some clubs and grounds and places that you're hiring, you're leasing, or that you've been in for many years, and suddenly you've done quite well and you're having to squeeze stuff in. It's not great to have a long distance between yourselves and the pitch, because again, people won't stay in those seats. They'll just move, and then they're going to give you a problem later on. And any seats that don't comply with the minimum standard for seat width. So that's all there written down in the guidance, but we tend to talk about 500 millimeters now is the average seat width from the center of one seat to the next. If you've got existing grounds, then it can be smaller. But if you go for anything too small and too narrow, you'll simply find once again that people won't actually sit in the seats, and you'll get all the problems we talked about before. So those are your basics. So what you should be able to do is walk up to a stand, have good access to it. It's nice and safe, it's well constructed, and it's a simple case of counting the seats in those areas, and that gives you your seated stand capacity. Standing terraces is slightly different. Lots of you have these. It's about the available viewing area. So this is the area that's just behind the barrier. What we can't include there, and it's a common mistake, is the space that is used for the gangways, the deep space that is sometimes at the rear of these terraces. It should be the number of steps, the width of those multiplied by the front and the sides. You'll get a square meterage. And then what we tend to say is that the maximum density you can put into any area like that is about 47 people into 10 square meters, or 4.7 people, if you can find a 0.7, into 1 square meter. You get anything above that, people won't go into it. They're not comfortable. And in fact, if I'm honest, I've dealt with a few clubs recently who put new terraces in, and they're struggling to get 44.7 or 47 people per 10 square meters. People are now they're slightly larger than they used to be back in the 80s and the 90s. And also, everybody wants to use their iPhone, so nobody's wanting to squeeze up close to each other and that type of thing. So people won't go into these crowded areas like they did in past years. So you may not actually be able to get that many people into that square meterage, and you may have to reduce it. But the baseline figure for you guys at this level is 47 per 10 square meters. So that's an important one. So you simply measure the floor space on your terrace. You subtract any spaces that are used for gangways, and then you come out with a square meterage and you multiply it by the 47 that we've talked about there, and you'll get a number that comes up. When you consider terracing, though, really important, especially for those that are moving up the leagues or have settled nicely into your positions, and people are talking about investing. It's really important, I think, and a lot of people stress this at the Football Foundation and in the FA club program as well, that you think to the future, because you can end up like some of the clubs, you end up in the EFL League 2 or you end up in the National League, and you become subject to far more scrutiny. And if the terraces have been designed in such a way that was practical and slightly cheaper at the time and that type of thing, you may find that you're not able to use them in the way that you were before, because the whole structure of a terrace is designed so that it's safe for people to stand on and they can see the pitch from wherever they stand. B, it doesn't get overcrowded, and C, that there's no movement within the crowd and there's no potential for overcrowding, or in fact people in the terraces get so fed up with the poor view that they go and stand somewhere else in the ground which isn't set aside for viewing. So really important that you try and comply when you're building and designing new terraces as far as you can with the recommended guidance there. But you do have to think about the physical condition and the lighting conditions, all that sort of stuff as well, to make sure that you can't forget, or the developers and the builders can't forget that when they build this stuff, they're going to be used at night time. They're going to be used in the winter, in the late afternoons when things get dark. And although the floodlights often give you an ambient lighting, they still need to be safe and well lit. So that's how you work out the seated areas and the standing terraces, fairly straightforward. The more tricky one for you guys at your level is around the level standing. So this is where you've got your supporters maybe on 1, 2, or even occasionally 3 sides of the pitch standing up against the rails. What we can do there is we can only go to a maximum depth for the viewing area there. So the depth away from the pitch side fence onto the hard standing can only be used as a viewing area up to 1.5 meters deep, and in fact that's actually quite generous. The reason is because you could probably get 3, maybe 4 people, one behind the other, into that area, but beyond that no one's going to see the pitch and the activity, and they'll simply peel off and go to places that you don't want them to, like entrances, radial gangways and lateral gangways and that type of thing. So it really is a maximum depth of 1.5 for your viewing area up against the fence. And to measure the level standing capacity is probably one of the easiest. So you simply do the length of the fence line along that area that they're viewing from. You multiply it if you've got that 1.5 meters, and then you get your square meterage or a square block along the fence, and then you pop 4.7 people into each meter. And you can get quite high numbers, particularly along the sidelines, along the touch lines as opposed to the goal. But there are some issues that we do commonly see. I've been to a few clubs in the lower leagues where, in the capacity calculations, in order to get the numbers up to the right levels, they've put level standing areas in front of a standing terrace or a seated area, which of course obstructs immediately anybody trying to watch from those allocated areas. So there's no point in having a terrace 7 steps deep, which can see the pitch really well and people can enjoy themselves, and then lining up 3 people deep in front of them. You can only have one viewing area viewing the pitch at one time. So that is something to watch, because a lot of the people doing the capacity calculations will come under pressure to squeeze as many people onto paper as they can. But the practicalities are, guys, that they just simply won't work, because the people on the terrace will leave their position and go and find themselves standing elsewhere, and your terrace will be unused, but the pitch side rail level standing area will be busier than it should be. Now, there are a couple of catches here. Some of the very smaller grounds and some of those older grounds generally have a hard standing that was required of about 0.9 meters that goes around the outside so that people can move backwards and forwards. That is what we would call the circulation route, and that should be 1.2 meters wide. The reason we asked for the gangways and circulation routes to be 1.2 meters wide is because on average, when we're moving, we each take up about 600 millimeters, believe it or not. So that will allow one person walking one way and one the other. So it looks very scientific, but it's as basic as that. So the importance there is that if you have got a very small ground and you've got fencing behind and you've got the pitch side fence right up against the goal, and you've only got 1.2 meters of circulation, unfortunately, you won't then be allowed to have people stand in that area because they will simply cut that circulation route out of action. So the ideal number, if you're going for a minimum, would be that you have 1.2 meters of gangway or circulation route along the back of the hard standing, and the front section up against the rail is 1.5 meters deep. So you need 2.7 meters of depth away from your pitch side fence to maximize your capacity. If, for example, you only had 2.2 meters, then simply your viewing area would only be 1 meter deep. And you can see automatically you start to lose the head count on your spectator capacity. So that's a really important one. And that's one to push back on. When you're getting the Astros or the 3Gs or 4G pitches fitted, quite often they'll come with the pitch side fences. Have a good look at that, because you really want to be going for 2.7 meters of hard standing to maximize your viewing area, because you don't know where you're going to be in 2 or 3 seasons. And you might want to be squeezing out as much space as you can. And what better that they lay the 2.7 meters of hard standing when they're doing the rest of that work, or move the fence slightly closer to the pitch, than you having to retrofit it and tear it all up again. So if your average ground down in League or steps 3 and 4 and below, even step 1, you're going to end up with those 3 calculations, I suspect. You'll have your number of people who are seated, your number who are stood on terraces, and your numbers that are level standing. To those in each of the areas, you then apply what we call the S-factor assessment, which is all about safety management. And that's just really, there's plenty about this in the guidance, so I won't go through it in too much detail. But you get a score that comes out of that. So how good is our safety management? How good are the stewards, the control rooms, the radios, and our policies and all that sort of stuff? And you come out with a score between 0 and 1. Most grounds, I have to say, score themselves as 1. And that means that you can use basically 100% of the people identified in the seats, the terracing and the level standing. So if your capacity is 3,000, you times it by that 1 and you get 3,000. If you had very poor safety management and you'd have problems and you can't get stewards and the control rooms out of use and the CCTVs no longer working, that S-factor assessment should really be coming down. And let's just say it came down to 0.5, then your capacity there for 3,000 in the ground would quickly fall down to 1,500. I hope that makes sense. And then we have what we call a P-factor assessment, and that's about the physical condition. How are the barriers? How are the seats? How are the terraces? How's the roof on the stands? And how do people generally feel safe in the ground in terms of all the physical aspects and the structural surveys and that type of thing? And once again, that's a score of somewhere between 0 and 1. If you're really good, you get 1 and you can have the maximum capacity. And if you're pretty poor and it's down to 0.5, which we do get sometimes, or a particular stand might go down to 0 because the roof has been damaged recently in a storm or something like that. If it goes down to 0, then that stand can have no capacity in, and that's how we use the P and the S factor to tweak your capacities there. So when you've done the P and the S factor on the holding capacity, as we call it, so how many people can you get safely in the ground, you apply your P and your S factor, you'll come out with your final number. And that tends to be the lower number, I've got to say, at most grounds, because the other numbers you need to consider, you'll recognise these, It's just about really the entry. So many of you will have had visits by the ground graders and people like that, and they say you need another turnstile, and you're like, well, we've got two. That's more than enough for our average attendance. But they only take about 660 people per hour, and that's the number that we work on. So if you've got a crowd of over 2,000, then you're going to need more than two turnstiles, and that is because at some point, like I said earlier, you'll get the big match, you'll get the promotion run, or you'll get the relegation battle, or you'll potentially get an FA Cup or a Trophy Vase match, where suddenly you're finding that you're going to need everything possible open. So you can get the people in the ground, and that's what the capacity is there for. What can you safely go up to? And in order to go up to it, you need to get people in safely. So that's important. What you do need to consider with the turnstiles, be careful. A lot of them are starting to rely on the scanners. You'll know that. And so what's your Wi-Fi like? Because if it's rubbish and it's not working, then it's going to be a real slow entry, and that might slow down the people coming in. If you're going to have a problematic match where you're doing a lot of heavy searching, then that again will slow the numbers of people coming down. So you're going to want to advertise an earlier gate opening and have a system in place where you can search and get people through. They can slow down the rates of flow. So you need to be careful. 660 an hour won't always work for you, but tends to be a good guide. And then people leaving. This is all about your exit gate widths, and most of the grounds I've been to at your levels tend to have plenty of exit gates. And it's just about how you manage them. So if they're having to go up steps, then we recommend that only 66 people can go up a set of steps in 1 minute. If it's a metre wide, and if it's a metre wide and it's flat, then you'll get 82 through there. And these calculations are fairly simple. And as I say, are in Rick's video and will be on here for you. And then you'll work it out. You should include staff for emergencies, but you tend to find that the exit gates are ample. And that's only for emergencies, because after the end of a match, normally it's only the actual spectators who leave. So what you suddenly do, you end up with a few figures here. You've got your holding capacity, number of people who can go in and view the game. You've got your entry capacity, your egress capacity, and if it's any different, your other emergency exits come in. But those three, entry, egress, and holding, whichever one is lowest is your capacity. That's really important. You can't have a ground with 10,000 people able to leave it safely if there's only 6,000 viewing seats. It's not a capacity of 10,000. It will be the lowest figure, which would be 1,900 or something like that. So you just need to bear that in mind. So it's not as complex as it seems, and you can do this yourself if you take your time and measure carefully. But it's something that just has to be done, recorded very well, and reviewed quite often. The other questions that came up, other than capacity calculations, was about the event safety management. How do you manage stuff? Now, we have the event safety management guide, which is, I think, £60 for an online version. But we hope that the Safety Essentials Guide gives you much of what you'll need. So what we're looking at there is fundamentally a few of the questions that came in is, well, how do we plan an event? What is the cycle for event planning? And I think this sort of slide, which is in some of the guidance we give out, makes sense there. I mean, the event planning starts, let's take a football club for a season. The event planning will start the day you finish the previous season. You'll want to hold your debriefs. You'll want your plans. You'll want to know your aspirations. Have you gone up? Have you gone down? How's the staff performed? Who's in what position within the hierarchy? Is that working well? And then you'll look at all your risk assessments. Did they succeed? And then you get into the event planning itself, and you'll look at your first few matches, and you'll decide what time kickoff is, what sort of resources you need, and what are the differences on each match. The first one might be a fairly low key pre-season friendly. The next one might be the opening match of the season with great expectations and a big crowd on a sunny day. And the next one might be a small trophy match or something like that, where your capacity again, or your spectator arrival and all that sort of stuff is going to vary quite wildly. You're then going to have to deliver the event, and then importantly, you're going to have to wrap it up at the end of the day. And again, you need to learn what went well. That's really, really important. You guys are out there really, really on limited funding, limited resources, doing an absolutely brilliant job, because you are up against it. When you look at some of the fantastic grounds that are built, designed 100% from the floor up, Tottenham Hotspur, for example, for football crowds, and they've got the super duper systems and stewards and all that sort of stuff, they quite often they can have an easier day than you do, having to deal with unexpected numbers arriving or problematic supporters that you had no idea were going to attend. So you need to debrief, see what went well, pat yourselves on the back, but at the same time have a look at what things could be improved. I prefer to use that phrase than what went wrong. Get the finger of blame out, and then you go through that cycle again. And throughout that, you take the learning into the next match. Throughout that, we call it the golden thread. But I think if you can get the balance right between safety, security, and service, that's fantastic. A lot of your clubs, you'll know the people so well. You'll get regular people turning up on a regular basis, not like Wembley Stadium where they come once every 10 years. You'll know your people. You want to make that a really welcoming place. You want to come back, and that's where service comes in. You need your security in the black background. If it's a difficult match, it needs to be highly visible. If it's a low-key match, just keep them in the background, but have them aware. And at all times, you want it to be safe, and it's all about the checks before, during, and after the match. So that's the cycle that we would use. You plan the season, then plan the first few matches, then you learn, and then you improve. There's all sorts of stuff in the guidance about a day. A couple of people said, how would you see a day in the life operating? Whether you're at Tottenham, Wembley, or down in the lower leagues, down with 400 or 500 people coming, it's probably pretty much the same system. Just the level of detail and the numbers of people doing it will change. But what you want to do is a couple of days before, get somebody to come in, open up the ground, make sure the electrics are working, your CCTV, the stuff that you're going to require engineers to come in and fix really needs to be sorted out 48 hours ahead. So you give yourself a chance on the day. Nothing worse than walking in and finding nothing's working. If it's cold or it's been windy, check for damage, check for frozen pipes. Pitch looks fantastic, but if the toilets don't work, then the match is going to be off because the public won't be happy. You come in on the day, you do another walk around, you make sure everything's in place, the teams are in place, the reliable people you need to deliver this are on way to work and everybody's happy. Your stewarding agency or your staff that are doing the stewarding and security are all up for it. You're doing your briefings, your pre-checks, you send your staff out, check your area, make sure it's safe. Then you open the gates, then you're going to search the away fans or segregate, and you make sure that works. And then the cycle goes through the day, and we've got a lot of advice on how you want to just check that, record it. And recording again, if it's just the checklist of that list there, and you've ticked and signed against it, at least you can say you did it. And you can say, I did my pre-checks that morning at 12:30, and there wasn't a problem. Yes, there was a problem halfway through the second half, but that was something we didn't see coming because we'd done our checks and everything was fine. Because sometimes when things go wrong, there is a bit of a blame culture out there with safety. And it's just really nice if you can get your piece of paper or one of your team can say, absolutely 100% sure we checked that and all went well. And then, of course, throughout, you'll be dealing with incidents. So these documents we've put out, Safety Essential Guidance, have got lots more detail and advice on that. Some of you will have been up in the upper leagues. Some of you will just adopt really good practice, and that is to have an operations manual, which also supports delivery of safety on the day. And this is all about the plan, pretty much for the season, really. And there's just a whole bundle there. You can probably see them of all the things that should be in a good ops manual, whether it's Arsenal or whether it's one of the lower league clubs. My lowest league club at the moment is Sutton United. They've both got good operations manuals. They just vary in size. And for you guys down there, if you've got your stewarding plan for the season pretty much worked out, if you've got your safeguarding plan and all that sort of stuff, it might only be 1 page long. But as long as you've got something written down that you can start with, that's fantastic. And then as the season goes on or the big matches come up, you just get that plan out, that generic plan, and you review it. You look at your fire safety plan. If you've had an incident, review it, make sure it's okay. So that's there for the season. That sits there, and everybody understands you need to do what's required and what maintenance schedules need to be adopted and all that sort of stuff. But on the day, you then use your other plan, your event management plan. Again, it might only be a couple of pages long, and it just identifies who's in charge, what times it's kicking off, who you're playing, what time the coaches arrive, the players arrive. It's a sort of document you can send around to all your people who are interested in the operation that day. And once read, everyone understands where you're coming from. And that will change up until the last 10 minutes. We've all been there where you end up printing it off 5 minutes before the briefing because something else has changed. But that's your live document for the day that you should be relying on. So that's your event management plan. that sits on top of your business as usual up there with the ops manual. And then all of that stuff that you've used on the event day, all the checks, the tests, the inspections, the log that we talked about earlier, and the event management plan and the debrief should really go into one folder in the control room or in the boss's office, be locked away for a few years, so that if anything crops up later, we do get it and you'll get it. You all know these people who I came to your match and I slipped over and twisted my ankle. I had like £4,000. There's nothing nicer than going to your file or your folder and finding out there was no incidents that day, and that everybody was happy, and this is a bit of a malicious claim. So really worthwhile keeping those records. And equally, if something does go wrong that's gone wrong before, it's nice to be able to get out and say, we should have spotted that and dealt with it. What happened last time? And compare the incident. So please do keep records. They really will save your bacon on more than one occasion. One of the other questions you guys asked was around stewarding plans and fact sheets and all that sort of stuff. So stewarding plans, very basic, really. You're going to need stewards. The reason the stewards are there is to support the arrival of the spectators, their time there, their circulation, their time in the terraces, the moving about, to deal with incidents, to potentially spot problems before they start and flag them up to the control room, to look after the pitch, make sure people don't go on, to deal with all that sort of stuff. So you will have in your own mind's eye, you will know from your ground, well, we couldn't open and we couldn't run the operation without at least 6. So that's 5 on the emergency exit gates and 1 in that position over there by the tunnel. So there's your safety critical roles. But we also need people, 1 per terrace, 1 per stand, the odd ones dotted around the pitch gates, and you'll end up with around, the number that you identify as the correct number there, and they'll all be doing different jobs. And this goes back to your event management plan. So you've got your basic steward plan. You know exactly what you need as your minimum. You'll probably go over and above that because you need a few spare for good customer service and that type of thing, but your minimum is understood. But then you'll get the difficult match and you just beef up the numbers because you want more on the seg lines or more on the searching or whatever. And that's where the response teams come in here. They call response teams and the pitch protection and the searching. So they must now, as they have always actually been, they must be security industry accredited, licensed. So your door supervisor badges for all those activities. So you have your basic stewards, but you probably have 4 or 5 SIA on an average big match. Smaller if it's going to be quiet and business as usual, but more than that if you're going to have a big away attendance and they're difficult. So they'll go onto the plan as well. You'll talk about in your plan how you induct people to the stadium because you might not get the same people every time. They need to know the very basics and you should sign that off. And then there's a opportunity potentially for toolbox sessions, which is just a sort of plan. What if this went wrong? What if that went wrong? And that type of thing. And then you want to know what standard of training they have. Is it level 2 spectator safety? Is that what you're hiring? Is the contract with your steward company at that level? If it is and you're paying for it, you should be making sure that they turn up with those qualifications. And then if they're in-house stewards that you're using, then you should check that they've got continual development because things change all the time. So that would be your basic stewarding plan. And for your grounds with some of the capacities which are slightly smaller, again, you're only looking at a few sheets of A4, but it's there, it's written down, you know what you're doing, you know what to check against, and if things go wrong, you know where you can improve. We've got all the fact sheets for that on the website again, so all the different complexities, we go into detail and explain what they are. There was also a question about Martyn's Law, which is very relevant at the moment. This is getting a bit stuck in Parliament. I think everybody's admitting that. The bill is in place. This is an extract from a November 2023 update. What do you guys need to know? You need to know that you will probably end up in the enhanced tier if and when it comes into being, because most of your venues are over 800, I would expect. You will need to do certain things at the moment, and there's lots of debate to be had yet, but we're talking about you having to notify the regulator that you exist, demonstrating that you've taken reasonable measures, keeping and maintaining a security document or a plan, and then you need to be appointing somebody who's in charge of that. So it sounds very familiar to me to the fire safety plan, which of course it is. What it's talking about is for some premises who've never experienced an operation before, this is going to be a bit of a challenge. But I'm pretty confident for you guys that you have stuff in place. You have stuff in place to make sure bad people don't get in, because you don't want disorder in your ground. You've got plans in place to stop bad things coming in, because you don't want pyrotechnics and bottles and all that sort of stuff coming in. So football stadia, sadly, or to your benefit now, have had to learn the hard way, and you have good plans in place. And much of the plans around counter-terrorism apply equally well to those who wish to cause trouble and problems at football. So I don't think it will be a huge impact for you, other than you will need to write stuff down and make sure it's recorded and able to be viewed should they choose that. At the moment, there is quite a lot of consultation going on around the lower tier. So that's the 100 to 799 people. And I think that will go on for some time before we see any huge change. So just watch this space. By all means, we've got a running commentary on the SGSA website about where we are. Your leagues, the FA and others are fighting your battles for you to make sure that you're not overburdened unnecessarily. So keep in touch with them. And if you've got any views or thoughts, let them know. Couple of other ones. If you go to the safety guidance, you've talked about pyrotechnics. There's good guidance on our safety guidance about what to do with pyrotechnics. Many of you have the challenges over hot pyros and 4G pitches, which you'll have to risk assess locally. But the general advice is let them burn out, let the match pause. The referees are very used to that now. You'll even see it in the Premier League matches on Sky. Everybody stands around, it burns out, and then they remove it from the pitch and off to a safe place. So pyros, the advice is on there. We've got advice on there about medical-related incidents in the crowd, which has been quite popular recently, where the play stops. We're trying to stop all the national leagues, the EFL, etc., are trying to stop the match being stopped where it's not necessary, but occasionally it has to be. There's advice also on there about terrorism, which is really important, and the extreme heat, because things are changing there. So all of that is on our website, and that's a quick rattle through. And I hope I've covered most of the questions that came in before. But I think at that point, Mark, I'll hand back to you for any clarification or new questions that might be coming my way.
Thanks, Andy. That was really helpful. Thank you for that. There has been one come in on the question, and it's from Steve. And Steve's asking, when ground sharing, if the ground has a local authority safety certificate, does that cover exemption from the sharer's stewards from being SIA qualified?
Wow. Thanks, Steve. Let me talk you through this. So the SIA exemption is in place. So many years ago, when the Act came in 2006, they realised that if everybody had to have an SIA badge, the football stadiums would have to shut. So they gave, working through the FA and the leagues, they gave an exemption for football grounds. So where a ground has a safety certificate in place, so if you are ground sharing and it has a general safety certificate that covers the whole ground, yes, the exemption applies to all those stewards who are trained and working at that ground. And it matters not whether they're agency or you've hired them in, that's fine. What you will probably find potentially at your level, though, is that the regulated stand certificate is the safety certificate that applies. And that certificate only applies, although it will cover the whole ground in terms of terminology, the certificate itself will often only apply to that stand. So the exemption, bizarrely, only applies to the staff working in the footprint of that stand. So all others will need to be SIA badged. I've got to say, I don't know what it's like where you guys are. It varies quite wildly in the upper leagues, but a lot of the upper leagues are now finding it just easier to bring in people who've got SIA badges, because not that they're hugely plentiful, but there's certainly enough out there to get the job done. And it prevents all the arguments about the grey lines. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Andy. I don't think there are any others. I think just to back up what you said about Martyn's Law, the FA and lots of other governing bodies are pushing back and questioning the detail within Martyn's Law. So I think that one's a watch this space and let the governing bodies deal with that via government, and then as and when we know exactly what the situation is, we'll be able to circulate that. And I'm sure there'll be lots of information coming through on the FA website, the league's website, and it will probably be covered in the National League paper and lots of other sort of outlets in relation to what the impact will be on football. I think the other areas I think have been covered. I don't know if anybody else has got any other questions. And if I think that what's useful and what's important to mention here is that you've actually put down a number of publications and guidance notes, and you've mentioned those, Andy. And I think what we will make sure is that we get those circulated to the leagues and to the clubs, so that they can access those and make use of those. I think, if I'm right, there was something like 8 to 10 different guidance notes around stewarding. Is that right, Andy?
Yeah, that's right. And the SAI question will be in there. For example, the safety critical roles bit will be in there. So it just gives you the rationale for creating your plan, and hopefully answers some very common questions which crop up, of which the answers are really important. So yeah, that's the important bit. I mean, that I very much rely on the whole reason for us producing that guidance is for the below EFL clubs to have access to not the deep technical detail that bogs everybody down and somewhat frightens most of us, but just to get access to the practical stuff that you can apply locally at your club, and where you are about to undertake projects. I deal with a lot of the stadium improvement plan project funding applications and that, and have a quick sight of those. And it's just those little errors where people are forgetting the very basics, and then you build and construct something that when you come further up the league, some kind person comes along and says, no, that's not being built in compliance with X, Y, or Z. If you can get it right first time, your life becomes a lot easier. And if I'm honest, and I think we've all been there, we all in these safety roles, in the operational roles and delivery roles, we come under a lot of pressures from owners and interested parties and directors and that sort of thing, whose job it is not to understand how things work, but sometimes it could be yours. And for you to be able to fall back, as I used to many times, produce a document that says, look, it's written here. We can't do the amazing innovative sort of thing that you'd like to do, but we can do something slightly different. If you can get it right first time, that would be my thing. And you use the documentation that we supply as your evidence and your rationale for trying to influence any planning and projects that are taking place. And then you won't have to take the blame directly. You can blame the SGSA.
Andy, thank you so much. I mean, I think the point that you've both made is there is so much information and guidance out there, but actually being able to pose questions to you directly is a rather unique opportunity. So we've got around about 10 more minutes left, and I would advise everyone on the call to keep posing those questions. And actually, we've had one come in from Rob, which was a question sort of in my mind as well, because there's a lot of information out there, but training is another thing. So I wondered, Andy, in the first instance, could you suggest some good training? And in particular, the question that Rob's posed is support for training for safety officers. Is there any?
Yeah, okay. I mean, for safety officers, there's. I'll just briefly talk you through. So you've got a level 2 qualification for a steward. You've got a level 3 qualification for a supervisor. On the last round where we went through with the qualifying bodies back in about 5-6 years ago, we did introduce a level 3 extended, which is for good supervisors who could probably take command as a safety officer, command and control in steps 3 and 4. It gives you a lot more detail about managing safety, managing crowds and that type of thing, whilst not overburdening you with reams of requirements about maintenance and all that sort of stuff. So the level 3 extended is good for the lower leagues who have not got huge resources and are not managing large amounts of people on difficult match days, and that's much more affordable and accessible. We would always encourage level 4 standard training for safety officers ultimately, but we do appreciate when you're rising through the leagues quite quickly, you can't always catch up with that. In terms of the CPD stuff, we run a conference each year at the SGSA, and the rest of it is very much. I would encourage some of you guys, if you can, you'll all have clubs locally to you who are higher up in various leagues. You might have EFL clubs and that sort of stuff nearby. If you're interested, I would approach those individual safety officers who tend to be either full-time or part-time, buddy up with them, and see what they're doing and shadow them on match days and that type of thing. Because there is there's a fair bit of training out there in terms of you can learn the green guide, you can learn this, that, and the other, you can watch these videos. But there's nothing like being there on a match day and watching somebody operate, and that gives you then your chances to pick up the best practice as well. So I had a club, I've mentioned them before, Sutton came up, a bit of a shock to them in some ways that they came up into the EFL, had a lot of challenges with the ground, but also lent very heavily on Fulham Football Club. There was a relationship there between the safety officer, who's fairly new, and Fulham Football Club, and they were absolutely brilliant. They just provided all the support, knowledge, and information, shared tremendous amounts of documents that which cut everybody back in terms of having to write stuff from new. It could be adapted for local stuff. So I would go for that sort of that buddy system. If you can do that, it's really worthwhile.
Yeah, that sounds a really good piece of advice. And you mentioned the key word for a lot of clubs, of course, especially in these times, is affordability. And we've had a couple of messages come through around the costs of doing some training courses. Craig has posted in, level 2 funding seems to be very scarce. Could we do in-house training and have it certified somehow? Is that a possibility at all, Andy?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I would suggest getting hold of somebody like the Football Safety Officers Association, because they have got people, again, when I speak to EFL, some of the League 2 and League 1 clubs, they're getting some of their training provided free by colleges who operate in their area. And that's not uncommon. So some of these higher league clubs who are dealing with higher turnover, therefore higher costs, but not having all the money of the cousins in the Premier League, have good access. So again, I think I would point you there to the Football Safety Officers Association, or into your local clubs, and again your local authority. So your local authority might, let's take somewhere in Hertfordshire, they might work with Hertfordshire County Council. Local authority also looks after Watford and other places, rugby clubs, and they might have a good handle and give you good advice. So even if you're not in regular contact with your local authority or even the local police, you may find that they're dealing with these issues as well. So Football Safety Officers Association, a buddy safety officer or a local authority might be able to help you with that. But there is certainly money out there which is provided via government sources. It's just a matter of finding it.
I'm conscious that time is ticking by, but I will just remind everyone joining us live that you can post your questions in the Q&A section. We've got enough time to go through a couple more. And the next one I want to ask is saying, should we record the person's detail on a medical report form, or is it just the initials?
Right, okay, good one here. So freedom of, GDPR and all that sort of stuff. I think the most important thing is, normally, if you're bringing in medical, so you're bringing St John's or you're bringing, Medics 24 or somebody like that, they will deal with the patient and they will take those details because they need them for their records. What they should then provide you with is they can either do it one of two ways, and it's for you to agree. What we tended to do was have a unique reference number. So it might be the date of the match and number 1 is the first patient. But what you do need to know, you don't need to know their names or their date of birth, but it is good to know their age and their sex and the location where the incident occurred in the ground. You can then, if you get a complaint in some weeks later, or you need to do some debriefs, or something worse happens, you can then go back to the St John's or whoever you're using and say, unique reference number 1 on this date, that patient, we think they're trying to make a claim against us. Can we get their permission to share details? And it's just a matter of tracing it back. So no, the club does not need the name and the date of birth and all that sort of stuff, but you need to be able to track it back to them without having to put too many complex systems in place.
Thanks, Andy. And sort of final question, really. Sometimes when we get the opportunity to have these webinars and get clubs together, more often than not, there's some really good practice out there that we can all rinse and repeat. But sometimes it's quite handy to know where perhaps mistakes have been made elsewhere that you can recommend and advise other people around. So I just wondered, has there ever been anything that kind of comes up quite regularly? It is quite common that you would just love to say to people, look, just bear this in mind to save yourself or cost or whatever it might be.
Thank you for the opportunity to say this. Yeah, I would say we're halfway around the National League clubs at the moment, and one of the real difficult ones is when they double up. For example, they'll put level standing against the fence in front of a terrace or a stand and count both areas in their capacity. That gets them through the ground grading system, but of course, when you come down and look at it practically, it does not work. So be very careful when you're coming under pressure to absolutely maximise your capacity, because some of the grounds on the ground grading, which isn't a safety issue, it's a league requirement. If you've got a requirement of you of 1,300 and your capacity is 1,310, any slight adjustment to that can cause you sort of disproportionate problems, really. So, where possible, those involved in these projects, don't take the easy route. Double check that actually this is a well worked out set of capacity calculations, and you're not squeezing people into places that they're genuinely never going to go into, and that they're not doubled up. The other one I would say, I think I pushed the point earlier, when you're doing the new builds around the pitches with the 4G and the fencing and that, always try and max out and go for 2.7 hard standing, because otherwise you're going to find that you don't have the maximum circulation route and the maximum amount of viewing areas that you would desire maybe a year or two down the line. So they would be my big ones. And the other one is to go back to, if you've got problems, go back to your people who head up the league and advise and ask the questions, and they can always email them through to us. We do get that. We can't always attend grounds where we can't attend many grounds because we've got other responsibilities, but quite often we can answer some of the technical questions. And again, if the answer comes back no, then feel free to blame us, because it's easier for you guys.
Thanks, Andy. And Mark, I'll bring you in quickly just before we wrap up as well, because it's been really fascinating to hear the intricacies, the details, and I think it really underlines the level of responsibility that is on the people joining us on this call. But any final words of wisdom, advice from yourself?
Well, I was just going to say that there was another question that came from one of the leagues, which was, can Andy actually recommend any courses that people could go on or should go on? But to answer your question, Charlotte, I think this is all about lines of communication, and it's about making sure that you do ask the questions, and there's lots of support out there. We're through the FA Club program. The leagues and the guys that are on here from the leagues, Paul, Kelly, and Jason, and as has just been mentioned by Andy, there are some, if we ask the questions, we can get the answers. I think it's more a case of how do we open up lines of communication, and how do we make sure that people within clubs, and all the people in the clubs, not just those on the call, but how do we share this information, and how do we make sure it's accessible? And I think that sort of turns this completely round, Charlotte, to the digital support and the information that we have on the Clubhouse, and the fact that all of the clubs across the National League system have got access into the Clubhouse and can access a lot of this documentation, the webinars, and also the information and support that's available, to help them and assist them do the roles and complete the roles that they have within the club.
Absolutely. Well, look, just building upon that point, Andy, I know you mentioned a couple of courses in numbers of your answers tonight, but any final ones that you would recommend to those on the webinar?
Yeah, just keep an eye on the SGSA website, because we do the webinars as well on safety management and different things that come up and are fairly topical. I think there's the Emergency Planning College that offer courses on crowds and that sort of stuff that you can tap into. But again, I think I don't know of any specific courses, but if you're dealing with a fairly complex ground or one that's being redesigned, if you want to go out there and undertake some of the very basic fire risk assessment courses, they're really good, because that's all about contingency risk and management. And what you're learning for fire, you can translate into crowd and incident management as well. That's some good stuff. And then I think the other thing you can do is, I would advise that every club would, if you've got good relationships with your police, that you work with them and run the tabletop exercises as well, and you will learn a lot off yourself. But I still think I would be cheeky. I don't know many safety officers in the EFL, for example, that wouldn't love to show and tell their match day operation and their structures and systems. And don't be shy, because they're a big family, and the people out there trying to manage safety at all levels. The further down you go in the tier system, I think almost the more difficult it becomes, because you're so restrained. So take advantage of those people. Have yourself a good day out, and let them tell you a few stories and share some learning.
Well,
and
Andy,
documents. And get all their documents off them.
That's a very, very good tip, one that I've made a note of. But Andy, I think on behalf of Jason, Kelly, Paul, Mark and I, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge, your expertise and your insight. And I hope that everyone on the course found this a really useful exercise. I know that some participants were struggling to begin with to get the whole of the webinar, but safe to say this has been recorded and it will be circulated as well. And I'm hoping it's the kind of webinar that you dip back into when you need advice as well. But as Mark says, the lines of communication are open, whether that be through the Clubhouse, the club program, or through your leagues. We're here to help you as best as we possibly can, and we hope that this has been a really helpful and productive start for you. So I'll blow full time on tonight's webinar, but we will speak to you soon, no doubt. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.
Thank you.